Chapter 61. Colleen, in big trouble. Well, then I'll happily help you. Saint hadn't finished answering her yet, when he flickered before the two men remaining on the ground, one shooting each with a single punch. In silence, Natasha compared how much she had to do with how easy it was for Saint to take down these enemies, then puffed and said, "You know? I take back my words, I do mind your help." Saint shrugged, "Oh? Then if we meet again, I'll leave one for you. Goodbye now." "Hold on." Natasha stepped forward, extending her hand to Saint and saying, "Natasha Romanoff." Saint first scanned the area, and found out that Shield's pursuit of the hand was coming to an end. Then, turned around gently shaking Natasha's hand by the fingertips, "Saint Lee." Saint wasn't going to conceal this fact from Shield. He knew all too well that his transformation would only fool ordinary people. However, with Shield, it would be foolish to think that they wouldn't know who he was. With that being the case, it was better for him to be honest and then solve things afterwards. "Oh, so it's really you." Natasha's eyebrows rose, apparently not unfamiliar with Saint. "You can actually fly? And, how did you become like this? Not only did the color of your hair and eyes change, but your face is also a bit different. You know me?" Saint avoided answering Natasha's questions. He was surprised that Shield would pay such attention to him. He never guessed that they would give him enough importance for him to be on the famous Black Widow's radar. However, he did not show his surprise. "I think we never met before, Agent Romanoff. Call me Natasha." She gave him a professional affectionate look before adding, "It is indeed the first time we meet. But you're quite the big shot, Mr. Lee. Being the only known disciple of Kame School, the extraordinary hidden martial arts school, you're a level 10 secret out office. Coincidentally, apart from our director, I am the only 10 level agent. Then I guess I should feel honored." Saint had already shaken off his attraction to Natasha, so he was immune to her eyes. After thinking of how to answer, he said, "Since that's the case, then you should also know that I've mastered many key using skills. Bukijutsu, which I'm now using to fly, is one of them. As for my state now, it's not permanent. I can change back to my original appearance at any time." Natasha nodded, "So you're saying that even flying is one of your martial arts techniques? And this change of appearance, is it a disguise?" "You could say so." Saint did not explain more details, and replied directly, "I am very glad to meet you, Natasha. Now, I have things to do, so, farewell." Natasha looked at Saint's figure that disappeared in the night sky, and frowned, saying to herself, "Weird. This little guy. He seemed to have recognized me. When I deliberately told him that I'm a level 10 agent, he wasn't fazed, nor did he ask any questions. Perhaps he already knew more than we think about me and Shield? But how? Could it be that he had information about us from that Kame Senin? I should inform Fury." Natasha avoided the public Shield communication channel, and took out a military encrypted phone. "Hey, I encountered the flying blonde superhuman, and you would never guess who he turned out to be." On the other side, Saint relied on key sense to fly straight to Colleen's location. He left Natasha in a hurry, for he had sensed that she was around the 4 future defenders, and near them, many key were approaching. Things seemed off. 5 minutes before he went their way, Colleen, Danny, and the others ran into each other in a street, and went together into a small alley, hiding in a corner. "Matthew." As the 5 stopped, Danny grabbed the daredevil by the collar. "Are you insane? Why would you attack a Shield agent?" Matt did not resist, and the exposed part of his face showed a bitter expression, "Because, the one they caught before I reached them was Elektra." "Your ex? Isn't she with Chaste? Why would she be wearing a hand uniform?" "I don't know, but I would never misrecognize her." Danny knew how good Matt's senses were, and could no longer argue with him. He gnashed his teeth bitterly, saying, "Damn it! We're in big trouble now." "No shit." Jessica angrily echoed Danny's words, and then turned around to Luke Cage. "What did I say? I told you it was a bad idea to give those 2 a lift." Luke was speechless for a moment, and then said with helplessness on his face, "Jess, it's no time for going, I told you so. Still, it's true, we're all in trouble. While you and I haven't done anything, I don't think Shield would let go of any of their companions." "Who's a companion of those bastards?" "Jess. Please stop this." Jessica pouted, and then turned around to continue pointing fingers, saying to the silent Colleen, you. The chick in white, why are you acting so high and mighty like none of this matters to you? You're killed 2 agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and did more than contribute to this mess. I just stunned them. Colleen frowned and said seriously, those 2 agents were preparing to shoot you. Would you have liked to bullet holes in your body instead? Oh please, they were aiming at my blind lawyer. What does that have to do with me? Do whatever you want, but don't go around putting the blame on others. Saint was right, you are a crazy woman. There is no reasoning with you. What did you just say? Chapter 62. Kamehameha. Stop being so noisy. Matt finally spoke, pushing Danny's hand, we should leave. I'm hearing many footsteps approaching. S.H.I.E.L.D. has found us, I'm going to divert their attention, and you take the chance to escape in the opposite direction. I'll stay with you. Danny shook his head, and his right fist shined golden, I am Kunlun's Iron Fist, and you are an apprentice of Chaste. Whether you admit it or not, you are one I have to protect. Jessica rolled her eyes, and with a slightly squeaky complaining voice, she clenched fist and twisted her neck saying, I'm not staying for you. I just don't want to have to find a new lawyer after today. Luke Cage also stepped forward silently, standing side by side with Matthew Murdoch and showing his choice with action. Colleen, who stood far away, raised her eyebrows in surprise. The 4 people in front of her never seemed to stop quarreling whenever they were together. However, now that things got real, they were inexplicably able to unite. It seemed rather confusing. Just as Colleen was hesitating to call Saint, the whole team of S.H.I.E.L.D. surrounding them approached the entrance to the alley. Everyone had their rifles in their hands with the safety lock off. Obviously, they were permitted to shoot those who attacked their fellow S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, so they almost had their fingers on the triggers. This was all a massive misunderstanding. The agents attacked by Matt and the others only had time to report an enemy attack before they all lost consciousness. Upon losing communication with them, and since this was a battle against a gang fighting to the death, S.H.I.E.L.D. assumed the worst. While their reaction was somewhat extreme, it was justified. However, Matt and the others did not expect this, and facing the surrender immediately or we will open fire, warning, they felt that S.H.I.E.L.D. was too merciless. Facing gun muzzles and probable persecution, how could they surrender? Therefore, when Saint arrived to the scene, he looked below only to find Colleen and the others facing an endless stream of bullets. Well, in all fairness, it was just Luke taking on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s onslaught. With his insanely durable body, he didn't have need to bow his head before this bullets, and was able to protect Jessica and the others. However, his willingness to protect them also kept him from being able to move and attack. Saint had been shrouded by flame like golden key ever since he heard gunshots. He flew in as fast as possible, not slowing down as he landed. Bang! The massive impact echoed through the street as he landed on one knee in the alley. Gravel and dust went into the sky, and his power was extremely amazing. For a moment, he grabbed everyone's attention, and the gunshots became less and less frequent until they finally stopped. Before I get angry, Saint raised his head, and then slowly stood up stepping forwards in large steps. He first said that, and then roared, guns on the floor. At the same time, he opened his palms pointing them towards the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and mobilizing air before him. It swirled and turned, raising the dust and debris even higher, as if a typhoon was passing. Then, all of a sudden, the 20 to 30 agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. before Saint were simultaneously pushed away by an invisible massive hand. All of their feet left the floor, and they found themselves flying away. Luckily for most of them, they just landed on their bums, having to only endure the pain. The few, who were less fortunate, fell on their sides and suffered several minor injuries and bruises. After for the minority that fell on their heads, the poor agents had concussions and fainted on the spot. This was Saint trying to use Jan Ken, paper with the support of his power level of 374. But this was not the full potential of his attack. He actually made it relatively weaker to cover a larger area. Otherwise, if he was to target one agent with it, it wouldn't be difficult to slap someone with it into their death. As Saint was acting on the principle of causing the least necessary harm to people, he just pushed the agents to land painfully but safely away from the 5 behind him. Well, at least most of them landed safely. He was just trying to scare them into opening a path for the others. The 4 of 5 who were in charge of directing the sub-teams that gathered for this all stood up difficultly before the rest shouting. Hold your fire! No one shoots! Did you hear? Hold your fire! Still, with them not backing down, this was obviously not enough for Saint. He took a big step forward again, and then shouted, waited, then shouted again in succession, open way. Come on. I said roll. Ugh. Can't you understand? Seeing their stubbornness, Saint yelled. The aura shrouding his body suddenly doubled in size, fluttering like a flame. He rapidly spread his arms, and then gathered them before him as if holding a sphere. He then brought them to the side of his waist as they shined with a dazzling golden yellow light. High energy response detected. Everyone back! Get back! All the team captains yelled in unison, their voice accompanied by the flashing red lights of their detectors. The energy response has exceeded 1,000,000 joules, and it's still rising. It's going through the roof. Retreat! Retreat! The good training that the SHIELD agents had received finally showed its value. Even in these life-threatening conditions, they did not forget to take care of the wounded. They dragged their unconscious teammates by their arms and collars, not leaving anyone behind. Saint was actually exhausted holding back the massive amounts of energy condensed between his hands, but he still did not fire, waiting for them all to evacuate. When SHIELD were finally out of range, he finally rotated his torso back shouting, Kamehameha! Chapter 63. The Sudden Change. Kamehameha! Saint's voice had not faded, when the golden key between his palms shone, releasing a white beam of energy that's thicker than his thigh. It advanced lightning fast, but remained to be seen clearly as it went, messing with the minds everyone watching. As the slightly downward inclined beam penetrated the surface of the ground, it seemed to go through seamlessly to fade into the underground, only for the massive sound of an explosion to deafen everyone around. Things blew up as it hit, instantly getting disintegrated with its frightening power into dust that went into the air, forming a small mushroom cloud. The explosion was still sending rings of dust and smoke in all directions, obscuring everyone's vision. The poor SHIELD agents thought they had reached safety, and while they were far indeed enough to survive, the shock wave formed by the attack caught up with them, bringing them down again to the ground after they barely made it up to their feet. On the other side, even Danny and the others, who all had extraordinary physical strength, could not stand up to the aftermath. They all bent over, desperately resisting the shock wave. Finally, when the dust settled down, they all could see clearly, the spot where the SHIELD agents used to be was now a hemispherical barren pit. The frightening sight had everyone in cold sweat, even Colleen. Matt, the daredevil, was the first to wake up from the shock. He turned to where he heard Danny and said, Danny, did you say that Saint Lee was only a little stronger than you? Danny Rand gulped hard and remained silent for a bit more, and then gnashed his teeth and answered, how was I supposed to know that he was hiding so much power? He's many times stronger than what I've seen of him before. After saying that, Danny felt deceived, and angrily added, this lying bastard. When we first met, he even claimed that if I used the Iron Fist, he would be no opponent of mine at all. Colleen heard Danny, and found the matter odd as well. However, she knew that Saint was really weaker than him at first. What was weird was the extraordinary speed with which he advanced, and that could only be the result of some big secret that he was hiding. Of course, any secret of Saint was a secret of hers as well, so she just let Danny go on with this faking weakness explanation. Just then, Jessica Jones suddenly bit her lips and walked over to Colleen's side asking, hey, chick in white, he's your boyfriend. Although such a thing was never officially announced between Saint and Colleen, but when hearing Jessica, Colleen nodded without hesitation, proudly replying, yes. That's my man, Saint Lee. Saint Lee. Jessica murmured the name again, and her eyes flickered as she smiled, making Colleen feel very uncomfortable. The latter immediately stared at her straight in the eyes and said, hey, crazy woman, why are you asking? Who did you just call crazy? Jess. Luke Cage stepped forward and pulled away Jessica, who was about to go into a rage. He didn't want her to bother Colleen in any way. After all, after seeing how powerful Saint could be, he lost confidence in his special body's ability to go against him. What if Jessica hurt Colleen and made him angry? Could he really step in for her? At the same time, on the street in front of the alley, Saint was watching the SHIELD agents dispersing and disappearing from the area. After they were gone, he gracefully tiptoed in midair, before flying straight to Colleen. After landing in front of everyone, Saint ignored the 4 defenders and only went for his girl, are you okay? Have you been injured? She smiled and leaned forward, announcing her sovereignty over Saint by putting her head on his chest and saying, "Don't worry, I don't even have a scratch on me." Saint did not seem to expect this reaction out of her. The girl who was chopping up her enemies with her katana during her last battle was now leaning on him, affectionately longing for his warmth in public. Something was not right. Nevertheless, the two embraced each other warmly and quietly for a good while before they separated. Saint held Colleen's hand and turned to Danny Rand saying angrily, "What have you done, Danny? If I didn't get here in time, Colleen might have gotten hurt." "Hold on." Jessica did not allow Danny to speak, and jumped in directly, "That's not what happened. The chick in white is also responsible. If it wasn't for her." "Jones, shut your mouth." Matt finally interfered, stepping in Jessica's way. Then, he sincerely apologized to Saint, "I'm sorry, don't listen to her nonsense. I was the first to attack the SHIELD agents. Miss Wing was just too nice, interfering to keep me from getting hurt. All of this is my own responsibility. I'm really sorry and willing to make any compensation you deem appropriate." Saint looked at the poor lawyer and had no interest in his sincerity. Instead of answering his apology, he turned around to Danny, "If I'm not mistaken, this lawyer is also affiliated to Kunlun, right? He made a mistake, so are you willing to pay for it?" Danny's jaw dropped, and he did not know what to say for a good while. It was not that he couldn't understand what Saint meant, it was actually that the man who just looked mighty and invincible was now more like some rascal bargaining. The contrast between his characters when protecting and when talking about money was just unimaginable. "You are really the dumbest Iron Fist in history." Saint thought that Danny did not understand him, and just went straight to the point, 100 grand, to compensate for the psychological damage born out of worry. "Hurry up and pay." Of the 4 defenders, 3 were in absolute shock, unable to even react. Colleen, on the other hand, was so ashamed that she couldn't even look them in the eyes. She could only reach to Saint's waist and pinch it with all her force. Chapter 64. We reserve the right to prosecute. Danny took out his phone as if sleepwalking, and got $100,000 transferred to Saint. He did not feel distressed about the money, a 100 grand were nothing to the heir of the Rand Enterprises, a drop in a bucket to his fortune. However, the sudden change in Saint's character was enough to cause him trauma. Well, he wasn't the only one traumatized. Fortunately for Saint, this chance to blackmail Danny had provided him with a great financial boost, with which he should no longer have to worry much about going broke as he spends more money on food. He returned to his normal attitude, and turned to Matt Murdock asking carefully, "You said that you've attacked SHIELD agents, did you cause any casualties?" "No." The daredevil immediately shook his head, "I just stunned 2 of the 6 we faced. They shouldn't even have any permanent damage." Colleen also shook her head, "I just stunned 2 as well." As for Danny, he was still a little flustered, and only reacted after everyone's eyes were set on him. He just repeated Colleen's words as well. "That's it." Saint thought, and then frowned and said, "Strange. Have SHIELD gone mad or something? Why did they react so radically?" "Hold on. Be quiet for a moment." Matt raised his index to silence everyone and then began to listen for something. After a while, his face showed surprise, and he began explaining to Saint, "I just heard SHIELD agents receiving a transmission from their office saying that Team E actually had no casualties, and that they only lost contact with them because they all went unconscious. I guess it's this Team E that we fought, it was all a misunderstanding." Hearing that, Saint frowned and raised his eyebrow, "So these SHIELD guys just barge in shooting to kill with non-verified information? And they say it's a global intelligence agency. You're not being fair. For them, this is a battlefield, and they must respond in time if any incident was to take place. If we were really killing their teams, it would be too late for them by the time they verify the information." Matt defended SHIELD. Saint looked at Matt in awe and then said, "You have Stockholm Syndrome or something." "I don't feel like a victim," Matt shrugged, and he seemed to have something more to say, but then he changed the topic suddenly. "SHIELD are approaching, I hear footsteps of 2 people." While Saint couldn't use key sense to spy on intelligence agencies' communication, his technique had a lot more range than Matt's ears, and he already knew that 2 people were approaching for a while now. Seeing how the others' faces began to show nervousness, he said, "Don't worry, they are both acquaintances. You stay here and I will go talk to them." From the devastated street leading the alley, Phil Coulson was walking in, when he saw a greatly changed Saint flying his way. Seeing that, he could only show a bitter smile and say, "Mr. Li, saddens me to find out you were hiding so much. Just call me Saint, Carlson," Saint said. He then waited for Carlson to look like he's about to respond, just to cut him off again. "I've been calling you Agent Carlson for so long that Agent might just become your first name." "Agent? What?" As Carlson took a deep breath holding himself from saying, "My name is Phil, you bastard," Saint turned around to look at Natasha. Her eyes confirmed to him that they were only here to talk. Right then, he heard Carlson finally saying, "Saint, you still like making your jokes?" Saint smiled and patted Carlson's shoulder. "Your sense of humor has improved. I never thought that I would see the day when you get my jokes." "What the hell are you happy about?" Carlson struggled to maintain his smile and said, "Knowing you for a while now, I never thought you'd opt to be a superhero." "Superhero?" Saint tried to act annoyed, but could not hide that he actually felt flattered. "Please, that joke is not even funny. I just have a little sympathy, that's all." So, Carlson was about to continue, when Saint suddenly turned to Natasha and said, "We meet again, Agent Romanoff." "I thought we were past that, Saint," the beautiful Black Widow smiled and said, "Why not just call me Natasha? Or did my name also become Agent?" Saint clapped and pointed at Natasha. "See Carlson? That's sense of humor. You should learn from her." Poor Phil's mouth twitched, but he did not answer. To avoid any more jokes from Saint, he went straight to the point. "Saint, we can let you go, you and your companions, and forget about your attack on our agents. However, you would have to agree to one condition." "Our attack?" Saint replied coldly, saying with disdain, "Trust me, Carlson, if I was to really attack, none of your agents would be alive. The ones who should be complaining about an unwarranted attack are us. We have made a mistake, and I'm thankful for your mercy." Carlson seemed to be apologetic, but then his tone suddenly changed. "However, this evening, you and your companions have together made violations of 13 federal laws, including attacking government officials, the obstruction of law enforcement, the destruction of public properties and the aiding of criminals to evade punishment. If you refuse to compromise, then we will reserve the right to prosecute." While Saint was no longer afraid of SHIELD agents by now, he was still afraid of them mentioning the law. The idea of going to court was enough to get him to say, "I'm listening. It's really simple." Carlson smiled, "If you are willing to go with me to our headquarters and see our director, then you could consider that today's events had never happened." Chapter 65. Lola. Nick Fury. Saint immediately uttered the name of the one-eyed man. "Why does he want to see me?" Both Carlson and Natasha were stunned. The latter even unconsciously stood in combat stance, asked Saint as she stared at him with cold eyes, "How do you know that name?" "Like I know yours." Saint stared back at Natasha. "Someone as big as Nick Fury, or such a debauchee, of course came school would have some." Bang! The sound of a gunshot interrupted Saint. Natasha pointed her gun to his head, sneered, and said, "Call me that one more time, I dare you." Ding! As Saint loosened his grip, a deformed build slipped through his fingertips and fell to the ground. The then shrugged indifferently, Sorry. I'm only targeting the one-eyed man, I didn't intend to expose your ears in." Bang! Saint reached out again, intercepting yet another bullet that was going for his head. After throwing it away, he looked at his palm and sighed, "This is not painless, you know. Don't think I'm just going to stand here like a dummy and watch you continue like this. You're already tried twice, and I warn you, I only give 3. Only 3? So cheap." Natasha put the pistol back in the holster tied to her thigh, and then looked at Saint awkwardly. "Me shooting is a rare scene, most would want to see it more, but most see it only once." Saint bit his teeth secretly, shouting in his heart, "She's off limit," and then turned around to Carlson, who was already dumbfounded, and said, "Well, I agree to meet the one-eyed man. But not now." Carlson returned to his senses and frowned. "Then? When?" "Obviously, you will have to wait for me to get Colleen home." Saint looked at Carlson, almost in disdain, and said, "I have a girlfriend, you know, I'm like you single VIPs here. In half an hour, I'll see downstairs at Colleen's dojo." Carlson watched as Saint disappeared into the corner, and then pondered for a while before turning to Natasha, "What's this VIP? It sounds good, but I can't get the contexts, and with Saint saying it, it can't be good." Natasha answered angrily, itching to reach for her gun again. A VIP is a distinguished guest. A dog. T/N, the Chinese don't not use VIP as an acronym for very important person, they say it and mean, distinguished person, which is written like this. A dog, or, is how they write poodle. I know, sounds cringy, but the joke isn't half bad when read in Chinese XD. On the other side, Saint landed before the 4 defenders and said, "You can leave, Shield will not pursue you." After that, Saint waved to Colleen and said, "Hop on. Let's go home." The 4 watched Colleen hang on to Saint's neck before the 2 disappeared into the dark night sky. They could not say a word, all wondering in awe about what he could have done to end such a big deal. While their expressions were all different, they were all equally confused. After a long silence, Luke Cage suddenly patted Danny's shoulder saying, "Hard fist kid, your 100 grand turned out to be of great value after all." Danny shrugged uncomfortable, bouncing off Luke's hand. "Big guy, can you just not mention that?" Hearing the conversation between the 2, Matt sighed and then patted Danny's shoulder as well. "Danny, what happened today is my fault. I'll do my best to give you the money back. Don't overexert yourself." His last name is Rand. Why would he even care about so little money? Jessica stretched her waist and yawned, saying, "What a day. It's finally over." "Wait, Jones. You have to be at court tomorrow still, and we have to prepare for the trial together." "Well, shit." Half an hour later, before Colleen's building, Phil Coulson was leaning against a red convertible. Looking at Saint's black hair and eyes, he was slightly surprised. All of a sudden, he started wondering if this was the actual disguise, and if what he had seen back in the alley was Saint's true face. As the latter approached Coulson, he looked at the historic antique convertible, and could not help but say with skepticism, "Coulson, don't tell me you're planning to use this old car to get me to Fury." "Her name is Lola." Coulson patted the car behind him, and then opened the door and said while getting to the driver's seat, "Trust me, Saint, she will surprise you." "You also gave the car a woman's name." Saint rolled his eyes, and walked to the other side to get in the car as he continued, "Why am I not surprised at all?" Coulson ignored him and turned the key to start Lola, confidently saying, "Sit still, we are about to set off." Saint smirked, "Sit still? Are you afraid it would be so slow that I would want to jump off the seat?" Coulson smirked as well, and did not answer with words. Instead, he slowly drove to a road with no people, holding the steering wheel in one hand, and then uncovered a switch on the dashboard, flicking it. The next second, the rims of the 4 tires started emptying a light blue flame. As they slowly turned under the car, they became flame-emitting rings that face the ground. Just like that, the antique car turned into something that belongs in the future. Lola first floated in mid-air, and then, as if flying a plane, Coulson pulled the steering wheel backwards, and she rose up further, before taking off. Interesting. Instead of scaring Saint like Coulson expected, Lola the flying car awakened the geek in him. After a brief silence, he said, "Is this the semi-finished concept car that Howard Stark put on display in the 1943 Stark Expo?" It was on that day that he first met Captain America. Chapter 66. Acting Cheeky. "How do you?" "Oh, the Captain America exhibit. I have to admit, while many people visit that place all the time, I doubt most have such an eye for details." Coulson looked back ahead of him, not trying to hide how much he loved this car. "Don't worries, the current Lola is not a unfinished prototype or concept car, she is very safe and reliable, and very fast." Saint smirked answering, "Worry? You seem to have forgotten, Coulson. If this car was to fail, the only one in risk of falling to their death is you." Half an hour later, Phil landed Lola at the gate of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s headquarters, and Natasha was waiting there for both of them, seemingly for a good while. She greeted Saint who descended from the car saying, "Welcome to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters." Then she turned around to Coulson saying, "I'll take over from here on out." Coulson nodded, and said, "Tell the..." "Wait." Saint did not want to interrupt the 2, but he said, "I said I'll come with him to see Nick Fury." Coulson was slightly surprised, but inexplicably, a little moved. Nevertheless, he explained to Saint, "Sorry, Saint, the details of your case have been promoted to become a level 10 secret, and I'm only a level 7 agent. This can only be dealt with by Agent Romanoff." "That's your problem, not mine." Saint confidently said, "I will not accept any change of the conditions already set." Poor Coulson glanced at Natasha, as if helplessly saying, "You deal with it." The latter frowned and she turned around and walked away 2 steps. After saying something in her earphones, she returned saying, "The director agreed, you can come with us, Coulson." "No, no, no." Saint shook his head, and once again pointed at Coulson and then at Natasha, "He takes me in, you stay." Now that she was obviously targeted by Saint's refusal, Natasha became rather annoyed. However, being the professional she was, she acted as if nothing was serious, and she said raising her eyebrow, "Saint, what do you mean? I just don't want to be around someone who could shoot me at any time." Saint was now being cheeky, and said what he knew that no one would believe, "It would make me nervous. When I'm nervous, I might act very inappropriately." "Nervous? You can stop bullet with your hands. How is a gun threatening to you? Half my life I've been a special agent, and I've never seen such a cheeky bast." Coulson stopped himself from saying all that, and stepped forwards pleading, "Saint, you don't have to worry. Agent Romanoff will not shoot you again. If you really don't feel relieved, she could also go in with us unarmed." The Black Widow could be heard by both men unhappily puffing when she heard the last sentence. However, she still said nothing, and nodded silently. "No." Saint shook his head again, looking quite determined. "The famous Black Widow's entire body is a deadly weapon. With or without a gun, will there be a difference? As long as she stays with me, I will be extremely nervous. What if my superpower goes out of control? Then the safety of the one-eyed man would be at risk. She should stay away from me." "Your superpower out of control? Are you serious? What happened to the 10 years of training with absolute control over every bit of ki in your body? You even used enough force to push back and then scare away 24 highly trained agents, all while having enough control to not hurt them." This was what Coulson was about to say, arguing with Saint, if Natasha did not interrupt him. "Coulson." She turned around and said in a cold voice, "I'll hand over the matter to you." Now, Coulson had nothing more to say, and he just walked through the door while waving to Saint, "Follow me." On the other side, Natasha, who already made some distance from the other two, said in her earphone fury, "Whatever information we have on this man, it's questionable. Who's the idiot who assessed that while he has a character that's a bit bad, his heart is really kind? He is just a sly bastard." 5 minutes later, Coulson stood at the door of a very large office, saying to Saint, "The director is inside, I can only get you're here." Saint nodded, pushing open the door of the office to find Nick Fury. Only now did he finish listening to the Black Widow complaining about Saint, and he didn't even get the time to take a cool pose on his office. "The One-Eyes Man." Saint walked in by himself, and did a martial arts salute saying in Mandarin, "I've heard so much about you. I'm so glad to meet you." Although he had heard this term before from Coulson and Natasha, Coulson never thought that Saint, a younger man, would be impolite enough to use it in his presence. As for what Saint said in Chinese, he understood none of it. So, Nick Fury took a moment to retain his calm before saying to Saint, "You already know about me and S.H.I.E.L.D. "Yes. I know about you and of the Black Widow, and how you're both veterans of a powerful governmental intelligence agency." Saint talked casually, and attempted to make all his past behavior more coherent. "When I met Coulson and learned about S.H.I.E.L.D., I thought that it might be the agency you belong to. However, it was a mere guess, and I only became sure upon meeting Natasha." "Understood?" Fury suspiciously asked. "Before, you were hiding your power. So why are you deliberately exposing it now?" For demonstration purposes, Saint had used the Kame school matter to explain his secrecy, so now he had to find a way out. Obviously, with everything being his work of fiction, he had nothing to hide. "I have a request from you. It isn't complicated, and it is." Chapter 67. Want Iron Man? Wait half a month. I thought that I should not be concerned with your shield, I thought your nosiness should be tolerable. Saint paused a little, and then changed his tone saying, "But I was wrong. It turned out, I cannot live with this. Starting tomorrow morning, I don't want to have any agents around my place. If you need me with something, come to the store through the front door, and when matters are dealt with, beat it. Your request is not out of discussion." Not reacting to Saint's orders, Fury nodded. But then, he also changed his tone, "However, we're not just concerned with you for anything personal, we're just following our regulations. What makes you think that we would make an exception for you without something to motivate us?" Saint shrugged and answered, "Go ahead then, lay your terms. However, be warned, if you ask for too much, don't blame me if I overreact. Don't worry about that, it won't be much of an effort on your side." Fury held the edge of his desk, and leaned forward to Saint, staring at him with his one eye. "Saint Lee, before anything, I must ask, how far could your key sense reach?" "In normal conditions, I can scan a circle with the radius of about 19 kilometers. In a special state, my range doubles." Saint sounded like he's bragging, but in fact, he was hiding a much more advanced technique. If he was familiar with a certain individual's key signature, he should in theory find them even when further away, which acted as a basis for instant transmission. While Saint couldn't perform that technique for now, he had Goku's knowledge that assisted him in going beyond his normal key sense range. "So, your maximum range is a circle of a 38 kilometers radius," Nick Fury hid his shock, and then picked a high-resolution photo from his desk, pointing to a blonde man on it and saying, "And I'm guessing, this is what you mean by special state." "Indeed. That is my explosive state." Instead of acting secretive, Saint continued making up his own lore for Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. He extended his palm, and dazzling blue flame wrapped his hand. "Under normal conditions, this is what my ki looks like. When I'm in my explosive state, my ki will not only turn golden, it would also change my appearance. More importantly, it will become more explosive, and whatever skill I use would be twice as powerful." "I see." After taking the time to let this important information settle, Fury finally said his condition: "We want you to go to Afghanistan, and use your key sense to find us locate someone." Saint smiled and said, "The missing Tony Stark. Not bad." Fury nodded, not surprised that Saint would make this conclusion. Then he added, "If you are willing to help us with this, I can promise that your demand will be met. He has been missing for a few days. While he would make for a greatly valuable hostage, but until now, there is no news from any kidnappers." "Do you really think he's still alive?" To make things natural, Saint asked this obvious question. "That's for you to tell us. Whether he's dead or alive, as long as you help us, we will agree to your condition." Fury did not want to argue. Hearing that, Saint did not know how to answer. To stall for thinking time, he smirked and said, "So you're risking a lot for a man who might be just a corpse." "Well, he is the king of arm manufacturing, so I guess to the US government and to you guys, he's that important. I guess S.H.I.E.L.D.'s weapons come from Stark as well." "It's not what you think. His late father, Howard Stark, was actually one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D. We're doing this out of respect." Saint's smirk faded, and then he once again confirmed, "So, as long as I agree to go look for him, you'll immediately pull back your surveillance, no matter what happens." Nick Fury nodded without hesitation. "It takes effect immediately. When you leave this building and return home, you won't find any of our agents." "Then yes, I agree." Saint nodded, and then he suddenly raised his hand saying, "But only if we go half a month from now. Only then can I leave to Afghanistan." Fury frowned slightly, and he asked rapidly, "Why?" "My restaurant has just been closed for 21 days. Now it has only been opened for 4 days. How can I afford to close it again? I need at least half a month to satisfy the costumers and give them a sense of consistency." Fury never expected such a casual reason, and said with some anger, "We can arrange to bring a replacement chef for you, and you would not have to close the restaurant." "No, no." Saint shook his head, "My customers are mainly attracted by my kung fu barbecue, and no one but me has this skill." "That's not a problem. There are already several restaurants in Manhattan that have started imitating you. If the chef uses induction cookers disguised as plates, he could easily fake it." "What? I would never, ever, deceive my customers." Fury understood that Saint was just looking for an excuse. Knowing that he would not give in, and after some thought, he asked, "So, if our troops in Afghanistan were to find Tony Stark before you go, then what?" "You're dreaming," Saint thought, as he remembered the timeline of the movie. Then, he shrugged and said smiling, "Then, I'll owe you one." Fury smiled, and took that as a promise, saying without hesitation, "Good. In half a month, we'll go. It's been a pleasure negotiating with you." Saint extended his arm to shake hands with Fury. There were 2 reasons why he had to take an extra half a month before going. He wasn't yet familiar with his Saiyan full power, 20% transformations effects and consequences. More importantly, he was afraid that he was to go too early, he would rob the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist Tony Stark from adding superhero to his resume. Chapter 68. Flying Dragon Ball. Would half a month be enough for Tony Stark to make the first mini-arc reactor and patch up the initial design for his prototype of the iron suit? Saint only wondered about this, for he had no interest in Tony actually making the Mark I suit in that dark cave. All he wanted was to plant the seed for the idea in his mind. As he and Nick Fury shook hands, a question popped up in the mind of the latter. You said that in Kame School, you are the weakest. Is that really true? You cannot believe me. Saint let go of Fury's hand smiling, and said, if you think I'm that strong, then you should know that you no idea about what's really powerful in this world. Nick Fury, a man who had lived for a long time and saw all sorts of bizarre things in his career, certainly had something to say about him having no idea. However, while he wanted to object, he was actually standing before a living example of something that he had never imagined. He could only swallow his words and go along with Saint. So you mean that in this world, there are many things such as your Kame School? When the time comes, you will know. Saint said mysteriously, or, you can think more open-mindedly and maybe predict some other things. Since you're seeing that the ancient Chinese myths of using ki to attack from a distance are coming true, then how about some other local myths? For example, the ancient legends of the Nordic gods, do they have to be fake? Fury once again fell to silence, and after gnashing his teeth, he said, you're telling me now that beings such as the Alfather, Odin, the goddess of love, Freya, the god of thunder, Thor, and the god of mischief, Loki, you're telling me that they all exist? Well, do you think they do? Saint avoided giving a definitive answer, and decided to continue teasing Fury. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Are you sure you want to know more? Like, how about heaven and hell? Coulson, lead our guest out. No need to worry, I will change into my special mode and fly out. Well, then we'll have to take you out to the, huh? What are you doing? That's not a window. Don't try to open. Crash. With the sound of glass shattering, the alarm immediately rang throughout the entire building. Sorry, too hard, cough, then I will see myself out. Coulson. Turn off the damn alarm, and ask someone at fix this glass. Over an hour later, Saint landed behind his restaurant. He muttered to himself, I should have let Coulson bring me here. When trying to keep my ki consumption below its regeneration, I can't go as fast as his car. After quietly entering the restaurant from the back door, Saint did not leave the transformation, nor did he alarm Lorna upstairs. He directly went to the basement of his restaurant, and from a humble closed box, he took out a humble grey stone. It was the Dragon Ball that he had intercepted after making his last wish. 4 days had passed, and Saint was not happy to discover that this time, he wasn't that lucky. The Dragon Balls were not charging at a fast pace at all, with seemingly none of them falling near any high-energy source. He could only rely on himself to charge them. As for what charger he should use, the answer was obvious. It was the same as last time, and somewhere exclusive to Stark Industries, the arc reactor. They haven't lost anything anyway, and it's been 4 days. Why would they still be keeping an eye on the arc reactor? After whispering that, he snuck out of the restaurant, going straight to Stark Industries. Compared to last time, Saint didn't feel as much pressure. On one hand, he was no longer the same, and on the other, he already provoked Tony Stark once, so doing it again now did not have much of a psychological burden attached to it. Besides, in half a month, Saint was going to Afghanistan with S.H.I.E.L.D. to personally rescue Tony Stark. Even with the latter's bigger-than-life ego, he should be grateful enough to not react too badly to Saint's actions. After over 20 minutes, and flying quite a distance, Saint became within 7 kilometers from Stark Industries. Right then, something that he never expected happened. The Dragon Ball in his pocket suddenly changed from its grey stone state to an energy form. The whole process happened in the blink of an eye, and it came out of his clothes and flew away. Saint could not anticipate what was happening, and by the time he realized it, the speeding Dragon Ball had already flown hundreds of meters away. Immediately, he wrapped his entire body in ki, and released ki from the tips of his feet at maximum speed. As he cut through the air, a loud noise voice was made a while after his passing. In fact, he broke through the sound barrier and was flying at a supersonic speed. However, even with that, Saint did not catch up with the flying Dragon Ball, because just as he went to the limit of his speed, he found that it changed its direction, falling straight down. Underneath, was none other than the giant arc reactor. Seeing it, Saint quickly dispersed the ki wrapping his body to extinguish the eye-catching flame he made for in the sky, and then flew for tens of meters silently, hiding himself under the dark night sky. The noise that his passing had caused should have certainly alerted many people within an area of a few square kilometers. Now, only God knows how many of them were looking up to the sky. Damn it! Saint sneaked to the top of the arc reactor. Through the massive glass roof that had been repaired, he could clearly see the dragon ball that flew away from his pocket. It landed on top of the arc reactor, falling in the same location as he found the 6-star dragon ball last time. You got me all worried, damn it! I thought I'd lose you. Chapter 69. Golden Boy. This whole matter made Saint understand a new fact about the Dragon Balls in this world. Whenever they would come to a certain distance from a high-level energy source, it was fair to estimate that they would spontaneously approach it. The 5-star Dragon Ball in his hand should be the only exception, as it was integrated with his soul, and cannot fly away. This made things clear to him. The first time he made a wish, the Dragon Ball that landed on the arc reactor was probably heading far away like the other 6, when it passed by Stark Industries and was attracted by the reactor. Well, since that's the case, should I make the next wish near the arc reactor next time? Perhaps all 6 Dragon Balls would end up landing here, and I wouldn't have to go searching for Dragon Balls again. Saint stopped talking to himself, and looked around and waited to confirm that no one detected the flying Dragon Ball, and then he turned around and flew back at a leisurely pace. Nearly half an hour later, Saint returned to Hell's Kitchen, but not to his own restaurant. He sneaked into Colleen's dojo instead. A few seconds later, in Colleen's bedroom. Ah! Startled, Colleen screamed, and then she realized it was Saint. You sly dog! How did you slip in here? A window was opened. Now, have you been practicing Bukijutsu? How long can you keep yourself in midair? You're coming at this time. Why are you asking about that? I just thought we could try some gravity-free love-making. Ah! You're going to die. Have you learned it? I'll never tell you. The next day, at 11 am, Saint was sitting his restaurant reading the newspaper at a table, looking pleasantly surprised. Golden Boy. He looked at the main headline on the newspaper, repeating the name, Golden Boy. It's not that bad, it's catchy. I think I like it. This is not fair. Lorna stepped forward and snatched away the newspaper from Saint's hands, saying angrily, whenever someone gets some superpower, they get all sorts of praise, but when we become mutants, we can only hide in the streets with everyone harassing us and calling us freaks. They're reporting on how I was saving people, don't I deserve the praise? When news is about a mutant, it's always about them losing control and hurting people, said Saint. Unlike me, you mutants obtain your power out of thin air, and do not know how to control it. It's a shame that there are no special schools in this world to receive newly awakened mutants and teach them how to control their abilities. School. Lorna's eyes lit up and she put down the newspaper looking at Saint. Boss, you taught me key sense. Don't you even think about it. Saint raised his hand interrupting Lorna. For me, anyone who can mask their ki and use key sense would become my weakness. Having you mastering these techniques is enough. I'm your only weakness. Lorna pondered thinking, and she realized that this was indeed the case. In this world, there was no one other than her that could sneak up on Saint. But then she remembered something and asked, didn't you teach Sensei? Colleen is not a mutant. Why would she need key masking? And why would I teach her how counter my skills? I'm not insane. You can rest assured. Boss, said Lorna with a straight face, when you taught me, I've sworn that I would never break my oath of secrecy to you, no matter what. I have nothing to worry about. Saint puffed, without me to introduce them to my ki, no mutant would ever sense their own. Without me, how would you teach them that? Lorna glanced at him, and feeling that her good gesture was ignored, she wanted to scold her boss, only to be stopped by the sound of the door chimes. Peter Parker rushed into the restaurant like a gust of wind. He was unusually early, but seemed to be in too much of a hurry as if he was late. He rushed in front of Saint, and started staring at his face. The latter frowned, and unconsciously put his palm on his face saying, "What are you looking at?" Peter's look was so bizarre, if it was someone that's unlike him, Saint's sentence would inevitably be followed by a fight. The not yet bitten, layman Peter released a squeaky sigh, slammed his forehead, and then stepped back, taking his phone out of his pocket, and pointing to a news report on its screen excitedly. "Boss, this is you, right? The golden boy mentioned here is you, right? Right? Right." Hearing this, Saint was shocked. He had thought that his super changed hair, along with putting on glasses, should be a significant change, even without him putting much effort in his disguise. How could he be recognized at a glance? "It's him." At this time, Lorna, who was watching with not too much on her hands, ruthlessly exposed Saint's identity, and then handed the newspaper to Peter, saying, "See? Our family's golden boy was just enjoying reading about himself in the newspaper." Saint was never one to hold a grudge, but when he did take vengeance, he did it on the spot. Hearing Lorna's words, he pointed at her and said to Peter, "She told you she dyed her hair, right? She lied to you, it's actually green, and she's actually a mutant." After a long silence, Lorna's hands suddenly lit up with a colorful light, and as she screamed, "Bastard," she made the knife and fork in front of Saint fly straight to his face. "Are you crazy?" In his astonishment, Saint ignored the knife and fork and advanced through them, grabbing Lorna's hands frantically with a horrified expression on his face, and hiding her behind his back. Then, he turned around to the store, looking at the street outside the door. It wasn't only the door that's made out of glass, but also the entire front of the store, giving any pedestrian that might be passing by an unobstructed look at Lorna's abnormality. Chapter 70. Little Spy Day's Path to School Hegemony. With the two revealing each other to him, Peter watched in awe as the spontaneously flying knife and fork made creases on Saint's skin before being rebounded away from his face. What a fierce face! It can't be even scratched by a steel knife. What would hurt him? A bomb. Lost in his thoughts, Peter suddenly realized that he was inches away from this invincible man. "AHH! Ah!" Peter Parker screamed, and he completely collapsed to the ground, holding his head. The rebounding knife and fork just flew over his head before falling to the ground. Seeing this, Lorna, who had lost her mind, realized that she had to calm down. She dissipated the aura around her fingers, and flusteredly and quietly asked Saint, "Did anyone see?" "Now you're scared." Saint let go of her hands and patted on her arm, saying, "No one should have noticed. Fortunately, I just managed to get S.H.I.E.L.D. to withdraw their surveillance. Otherwise, you'd be in a world of trouble right now. It's all your fault." The stubborn Lorna punched Saint's back. "You're insane. Why did you tell Peter I'm a mutant?" "Because he's his own man." Saint did not say the next sentence is his mind, and he will also have his own superpower to hide in the future, and then added while looking at Peter, "He will not discriminate against you, nor will he ever tell on you. Right, Peter?" "No, no, no, yes." Peter stood up mumbling and waved his hands, saying, "Believe me, Lorna, I will never tell anyone. Your secret is safe, absolutely safe." Lorna bit her lower lip in frustration, apparently not satisfied with Peter's verbal guarantee. She once again punched Saint's shoulder and said, "He's just a brat, and he talks too much. How do you know that he could keep this a secret?" "Ha ha!" Saint laughed and then said coldly, "What do you want now? Try to kill him as well? Haven't you thought of him being so talkative when you exposed my identity? You're obviously already exposed." Even if I said nothing, Peter had already guessed it. "Yes, exactly. It was a guess, and I could just deny it. Do you think he would have believed you? Well, he's here with us. Peter, you would have believed me, right?" For young Peter, this was a battle of gods taking place before him. Taking any side could open the gates of hell on him. Therefore, being stared at by both of them, he mumbled, shook his head in denial and then nodded in approval, and couldn't utter a single understandable word. "You're no fun." Saint shook his head in disinterest, and then walked to the kitchen to put an end to this farce. "Peter, get ready to have lunch, costumers are about to come." Peter was stunned and rushed straight to the locker room. As he changed to his working clothes, he asked himself, "Hey, I have leverage on boss right now. Why not get him to teach me martial arts? Why remain the only weak one?" Peter Parker's mind became haunted by this thought, and during the family dinner, he finally managed to summon his courage and say very abruptly, "Boss, I can keep your secret hidden, but you must teach me your Chinese Kung Fu. Otherwise, I will. Are you jealous?" Facing Peter's unspeakable threat, Saint just felt amused. This kid quickly had the courage to ask for such a thing, and called his style Kung Fu. Facing this, he quickly went back to him old pretext and said, "Peter, your personality is too jumpy, and you're too deep into your beliefs in modern science. You would never be able to grasp the concept of Ki, let alone learn my style of martial arts. I'm not making a pretext here, I'm just laying down the hard cold facts." Hearing those words, Peter's head sunk into his arms in disappointment. Seeing that he believed him, Saint breathed a sigh of relief and added, "But if you really want to learn martial arts, I can teach you striking and fighting skills and make you a good fighter. While that won't make you exactly a superhuman, it would be more than enough for you to beat 2 or 3 of your fellow students, even when you're still a beginner." "I'm not trying to beat my classmates," Peter hurriedly answered, and then pointed to Lorna saying, "What do you mean by fighting skills?" "Like the stuff Lorna is learning from Ms. Colleen." "You can say that." Saint nodded, "But it's still different. Colleen's style revolves around balancing one's flexibility and rigidity to grant them better passive defensive capabilities. I can teach you a more aggressive style, one that's more based on attacking." "How long will it take for me to be able to beat 2 or 3 Stu?" Peter accidentally leaked out the true thoughts in his mind, and then embarrassedly changed his tone saying, "How much will it take me to learn Kung Fu?" "It will depend on your learning ability, and on the time and effort you would put into this." Saint first gave a vague answer, and then looked up to Peter and said, "If you work hard enough, in a month or 2, you'll be getting a good glimpse of the way before you." "Boss, if a beginner would beat 2 or 3 people, then if I become a master, would I be able to take down 10 people?" "It depends on who you'll be fighting. If you are just classmates, you should be fine." "Boss, can we not mention classmates? For example, what about gangsters?" "That would make things more complicated. It would depend on the range of the blades they carry, and on whether or not they have any guns on them." "Classmates it is then." "Boss, how long will it take me to be a Kung Fu master?" 8 to 10 years. 2 weeks passed calmly. During these 14 days, Saint had his ordinary life. Well, ordinary didn't exactly sound right when describing his life ever since he crossed over to this world. In short, Saint trained every morning, afternoon, and after dinner. He also worked diligently. Every night after dinner, he would go to Colleen's dojo. There, he trained, all while teaching Peter basic skills. At this time, Lorna would also follow for the fun of it, and practice under Colleen's guidance. Occasionally, she would talk to Peter about martial arts and give him some pointers. After all, even without her mutant powers, she could easily crush him in a fight. Little Spy Day's path to becoming the school's tough guy was still at its beginning, and was to certainly have its ups and downs. Chapter 71. First World Problems. As Peter became the newest frequent guest of Colleen's dojo, Saint's restaurant also had its own new regular, Jessica Jones. Well, she wasn't just a regular costumer, but also a regular problem. It wasn't that she sought trouble or made a ruckus, but every time she came, she would stare at Saint with her seductive eyes. To him, she was like a ripe red apple. Her fair delicate skin and slender physique gave her a porcelain doll beauty that made her really attractive, and so did her big charming eyes. However, she was also forbidden, as Saint, who was with Colleen, could never make a move on her. As for Jessica's sudden expression of interest, it was surprising to Saint, but he could guess what was behind it. This slender beauty could crush most men in the world in battle. Even the amazing Captain America was far less powerful than her physically. T/N, in the comics, this is true. In the MCU however, feats from both characters don't show this to my knowledge. Still, feats are not indicative of power, so I guess such a statement could be correct if the author wants it to be. In this era that was not yet flooded with superheroes, Saint realized, rather proudly, that he was the first man that Jessica had encountered who was actually stronger than her. In fact, even when this era or peace would end, there would only be a handful of people who could beat Jessica. As for her ex-boyfriend Luke Cage, well, she would only need a bed behind him to be able to beat him. Yes, any other man would be crushed along with the bed if she was to throw him on it, while Luke would be durable enough to go beyond that, but he would still be. Cough. Anyway. Just as Jessica Jones came for the 3rd day in a row to Saint's restaurant, another woman seemed to remember a joke that Saint made month ago. Colleen left her dojo, and actually came to work at Lee's Chinese restaurant. Her position was like that of the boss's wife. Saint knew all too well why Colleen was here for help. She said that she had no students other than Lorna at the dojo, and the latter was at the restaurant during the work hours. She also had learned Bukijutsu, and had now 4 techniques to develop, needing Saint to assist her between hours. This is what she said, but in reality, she was just here to force Jessica to retreat. However, Colleen's presence did not seem to reduce Jessica's enthusiasm about the food. In fact, it actually seemed to only encourage her. By the 7th day, Saint started feeling that she was getting here more to provoke Colleen rather than tease him. How was the relationship between the two in the Defenders? Saint could not remember, but he was certain, at least, that it wasn't as strange as this. As male protagonist of this 2 women fighting over one man drama, it would be a lie to say that Saint wasn't enjoying this, but as cool and flattering as it was, this was still a headache to deal with. Rabbits do not eat the grass around their burrows, you know. Couldn't you try to seduce me elsewhere? If you did that, maybe I would consider. Cough. Saint thought. Translator note, the saying about rabbits is a Chinese idiom meaning that even villains don't usually hurt their neighbors. In this context, it means that Saint wouldn't take a bite of this forbidden apple while around home. Trapped this bittersweet situation, Saint soon realized that after 14 days, Jessica still did not give up. In the past 2 weeks, she would come to the restaurant at least once a day. Nevertheless, Jessica's perseverance didn't really bother Saint. What actually bothered him was that 20 days later, and after adapting much better with his new genes, he still wasn't getting stronger at any faster rate. In fact, he was growing at less than half the rate he used to grow at before becoming a Saiyan. Before, when practicing this hard, he could even add up to 5 points to his power level every week. Now however, he was getting 2 points stronger on average. Yes, when using his Saiyan full power transformation, that meant around 4 points of growth weekly, but that wasn't his usual state, and things weren't to be calculated in such a manner. Now, after some good though, he realized that what he needed was a more active style of training. He quiet training from before used to work well, but by becoming a half Saiyan, and having the genes of the fighting nation, he needed more action. The only way now for him to get stronger rapidly was for him to fight more frequently. Alas! Where was he going to fight a suitable opponent this year? Saint was approaching the 400 power level mark, and even the early Iron Man suit might not withstand his attacks. Thor did not come to Earth either. The Hulk was hiding and wasn't coming out anytime soon. Who to fight? Should he wait for the Cap? But then, Steve's greatest power was his leadership character and righteousness. He shouldn't be much of a challenge to Saint. This was very frustrating to Saint. He couldn't rely on the Zenkai ability either, at least not before having a good amount of senzu beans. Therefore, Saint now could only live with this slow growth in power, because even if he wanted to, a challenge to him would be hard to find. Well, in terms of total amounts of ki, there was always young Miss Polaris by his side with a power level of over 500. However, under normal condition, she could only use around 50 to 60. Even if she did manage to use all her power, she wouldn't be able to control it at all. Yes, the better fighter, Saint, should be able to work around her power, but the two couldn't just watch a few street blocks get demolished in an instant. As for the other two around him, Colleen was getting stronger, but her power level was still under 40, and the young Peter wasn't even average, with a measly power level of 4. How about the 4 defenders? Danny, the strongest force of Kunlun, could mobilize around 80% of his power level and launch attacks at the low 100s. Yes, his attack power should be a challenge to deal with, but besides his Iron Fist, his defense was too weak. Saint could now one-shot him with one blow. Luke was the exact opposite. 80% of his power was constantly dedicated to defense, but his attack power was incomparable to that. He was indeed strong enough to beat a squad of ordinary people, but his attacks shouldn't even scratch Saint. Chapter 72. The Quinjet. Matt Murdock nighttime persona was certainly different from that of the other less experienced heroes. Not only did he have an extremely rich combat experience, but he also had formal training and had the perk of being a natural bioradar. This made him a tactical master who is incomparable to the other three. But besides his super senses, he did not have much power level at all, with 10 of points his power assigned to his defense, and another 10 assigned to his attack power. The one with most balanced defense and attack power was Jessica. She had a power level of over 100, and was agile enough to avoid being hit. However, this civilian had not received any systematic training. Being too reliant on her brute force, she should actually be the easiest for Saint to take down among all 4 defenders. Who else? For now, I'm actually invincible. I never thought it would feel so lonely. In this abyss of self-indulgence, Saint became forgetful, completely missing the fact that not too far from him, there was Camartage's New York sanctum. There, he would have worthy competition, if he's willing to risk his life. Anyway, in the past 2 weeks, besides the trivialities mentioned above, 2 major events took place outside Saint's restaurant. The first was S.H.I.E.L.D.'s second attack on the hand. While they did not manage to take down any of the 5 fingers, they did manage to hit the organization hard. The operation went so well that they managed to destroy whatever was to be called the Hand Army. As for Chaste, they did not suffer as many losses, even though they were existent mainly in name after the last time's fight. Now, the Hand was to probably need at least a decade to get back to their old level of power. S.H.I.E.L.D. however were not done. Within the 2 weeks, they hit around 90% of Hand's various small and large bases, including the charity that Colleen used to be involved with. Most of the Hand's members caught were incarcerated, while the few minors that were recruited by the organization were sent for reform in child detention centers. With this happening, what was aching Colleen was mostly solved very quickly. Still, until she could kill Bakuto, her demons would still hunt her. The second thing that happened was that after saving many people from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s bullets and the Hand's blades, Saint's reputation soared among the public. Well, it wasn't exactly Saint who got famous, it was the newborn superhero, Golden Boy. 14 days of the news about him fermenting in New York and across the country were enough to spread this image of the spiky blonde-hair superhero. This image of his was actually a reason for his increasing popularity. As a country made out of immigrants, the United States had a population that's ethnically very diverse. While equality was strived for by most citizens, racial prejudice still existed. Minorities, whether Asian, African, Latin Americans or Indians, were inevitably subject to varying degrees of discrimination by a few who considered themselves elite. Coincidentally, the blue-eyed blonde-hair appearance of Golden Boy established his image as an all-American white superhero, like Captain America before him. Golden Boy was a description of Saint's value to the people as much as it was a description of his appearance. But if one day, the public would discover that their all-American Golden Boy was actually a Chinese teenager, the reaction of some of his supporters would certainly be a sight to behold. On the 15th day, according to his agreement with Fury, Saint went to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s headquarters in his Golden Boy state. There, Coulson was awaiting him. He led him through a corridor, at the end of which he found a special jet. It was different from other jets, which usually had normal wings that went downwards to the side. This small aircraft was different, with its wings actually bent upwards like those of a bird. It was the Quinjet. Saint immediately recognized this jet specific to S.H.I.E.L.D. Besides Wakanda's advanced jets, the Quinjet was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Even the future Avengers aircraft is a special Quinjet built by Tony Stark. To the fanboy in Saint, this was an incredibly exciting moment, but the oblivious civilian in him had to keep calm. Therefore, he looked unimpressed to Coulson. Seeing that, the latter couldn't help but say, "This is a jet unique to S.H.I.E.L.D., the world's first Quinjet. It's a jet fighter capable of taking off and landing vertically." "The first?" "Haha." Saint ruthlessly answered Coulson while pointing at the Quinjet, "This jet uses the same turbojet engine as your car. Howard Stark, one of your founders, put forward the concept as early as 1943 and provided experimental research results. And now, in 2009, this is what you have made out of his work, and you're being so proud." Coulson looked away from Saint, secretly swearing in his heart for the 1000th time that he would never start a non-needed conversation with him again. The two walked to the door of the Quinjet, and in the pilot's seat, they found Coulson's old partner awaiting them, Melinda May. Seeing her, Saint was surprised more than when he saw the Quinjet. Immediately, he squinted, staring directly at her, and said in Chinese, "Wow, you've actually learned how to use Qi." "It's thanks to you." May answered in Mandarin, and thanked Saint dryly with a tone filled with contempt, "If it wasn't for you letting me sense your Qi, I wouldn't have been able to learn Kunlun's techniques. Thank you very much." Chapter 73. The Great Tony Stark. Seeing Saint shocked, Coulson broke the vow he had just made once again, and said with pride, "May is very talented, and the director gave her access to our records on Kunlun. With that information, she began cultivating her Qi in just one day." Saint looked at Coulson with disdain. "You know, I feel sorry for you, being a layman. You shouldn't talk about what you don't understand. What does this have to do with talent? She's been learning martial arts for years and years. With that, it's only logical that she could grasp the concept of ki with my help. I tell you what, I'm willing to bet that she's your only successful case. As large and mighty as S.H.I.E.L.D. is, how good would it be to have only one talent? So, am I right? Coulson was speechless again. Seeing that he did not refute his supposition, Saint pointed to Melinda May, and said coldly, Coulson, you've asked me before to teach your agents. Now, I'll tell you plainly, for her, I can give some pointers. Melinda's eyes went bright, and her heart started thumping fast in excitement. But then, Saint's tone changed, and he added, of course, it will not be for free. Coulson frowned slightly, and after exchanging looks with Melinda, she asked instead of him, Saint, can you tell me what you want? I want a lot, Saint shrugged, but you're not the one calling shots here. Instead of asking me, you'd be better off asking the one-eyed man and see how much he's willing to pay for me to instruct agents of your bureau. I understand. Coulson nodded, putting the matter on hold for a while. Then, he turned around to Melinda May and said, May, we should leave. While she was reluctant to change to topic, Melinda was professional enough to know that duty was above all. She turned around and walked to the cockpit saying, in 1 minute, the cabin's door will close. We'll be taking off in 3 minutes later, the left and right engines of the Quinjet blasted off blues flames simultaneously, creating a burst of wind around the jet. Then, the fighter started levitating like helicopter to the sky. After getting to a sufficient height, a pair of engines behind also released their flames, pushing the Quinjet forward heading into the clouds. At the same time, in the southwestern part of Afghanistan, in a cave in the desert. In the deepest part of the cave, the sound of a hammer hitting steel could be heard, and a handsome man, one with a mustache and a goatee, tirelessly waving his gavel in sweat, could be seen. The playboy fanaticized about by thousands of women, the chairman and heir of Stark Industries, the talented scientist and engineer, and the great inventor and philanthropist did not lose his charm under the harsh conditions of captivity. The current kind of arm trade in the Marvel world and future energy emperor, Tony Stark, was forging his own way to freedom. In contrast to his glamorous future image in his iron suit, saying that he wasn't at his best would be an understatement. But compared to the middle-aged bald man in glasses by his side, he still looked much better. Yinsen, Tony turned around and said to the man by his side, pin nose pliers. Yinsen handed him the tool he needed, and then pointed to stack of drawings in the corner of the cave and worry, Stark, with how things are going, it should take us around half a month to make all the parts you've drawn. You think they will give us so much time? We will fight for time. Tony used the pin nose pliers to finally adjust the edge of the metal piece in his hand, and without turning he said, Yinsen, we will definitely come out of this alive, I promise. Yinsen smiled bitterly and said, how are you so confident? It's because I'm Tony Stark. Tony hit his chest. Hearing the sound of metal, he looked at the light going through his top and couldn't help but fall into memory. About a month ago, after a demonstration of Stark Industries' new Jericho missile to the US Army, he was ambushed on his way back to the military base. Ironically, the terrorist group who attacked them, the 10 Commandments, used weapons from Stark Industries, which were even branded with his trademark. With the protection of his high-tech bulletproof vest, Tony survived, but not without many shrapnel penetrating into his chest. If it wasn't for the highly skilled Dr. Yinsen, he wouldn't be alive today. Yinsen took out most of the shrapnel with surgery. However, some were too small and entered his blood vessels. There was no choice for the doctor and the scientist, Yinsen, but to build a magnet-electromagnet to keep them from reaching his heart. Therefore, the first thing Tony Stark woke up to was a car battery connected through wires to his chest. Such an arrogant man would never accept such a life. For a long time, Tony did not make any compromises, never yielding to the 10 Commandments, accepting death. That was until Yinsen asked him, after long sessions of torture, is this how you want to go out? Is this the last act of defiance of the great Tony Stark? Or are you going to do something about it? These questions changed his arrogance into pride, and reminded him of what he had faith in the most, himself. The first thing he did was to falsely agree to the 10 Commandments requirements, by acting like he was recreating the Jericho missile for them. Using the sum of the materials that they had provided, he started by making a miniature arc reactor, one that would replace the car battery protecting his heart, and that would be used for something much bigger, later on. Chapter 74. The Not-So-Great Cause of Saint Lee. At the same time, Tony had already begun working on the blueprints for the prototype for the iron suit. This was to be named Mark I, in a reference to the world's first tank. Just like that one weapon changed the world back in the day, this one was to be Tony's way out of this hell. This was the great Tony Stark. Filled with emotion, Tony raised his hammer, slamming the iron piece on the anvil once again. It was a pity that Saint's arrival was to keep this dream of Tony from coming into fruition, at least for now. 8 hours later, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Quinjet landed in a U.S. military base in Afghanistan, with 3 people walking out of its rear cabin. Welcoming them was a female CIA agent. Just like when they first met Saint and claimed to be FBI, Coulson and Melinda May now became CIA agents. You are, seeing Saint in his transformed state, the CIA agent actually recognized him, Golden Boy. You are Golden Boy. That is confidential. Saint made a poker face and said, if I tell you, I would have to kill you. Don't rip off people's jokes in their presence, bastard. Coulson looked furiously at Saint without saying a word, and then stepped forwards and extended his arm to the agent saying, don't mind him please, I am Phil Coulson, the agent in charge of this operation. The agent flusteredly reached out to shake hands with Coulson. Tina Johansson, senior agent. Pleasure to meet you, sir. The pleasure is mine. Now, can you take us to the conference room? Yes, sir. After all 4 entered the conference room, Tina Johansson immediately opened the projector which showed a topographic map of Afghanistan on the screen in front of them. At the same time, she explained, the green areas are ones that we have searched closely, the ones in yellow are the ones that we aerially explored, and red ones are the ones we haven't explored yet at all. I don't need to be looking at this, said Saint, remove this rainbow of a map, and show me another one with the mountain areas and large sand dunes marked. Tina glanced at Coulson, just to find him nodding for her to do as he said. Seeing that, she used the computer and made the map show what Saint had required. Looking at the map, Saint walked up to it and drew 2 twisted lines, take me to fly over this line. If I don't find him, go along this line. You have the final say. Coulson understood that Saint was expecting that Tony would be hidden by the 10 commandments in a mountain base. Indeed, this being the case was highly probably. Fully agreeing with this speculation, he did not argue, asking the visibly concerned Melinda May instead, is there a problem? I need a little time to get familiar with the terrain before flying over it. Have your time. After saying that, Coulson turned around to Tina Johansson saying, inform the military, we might need their cooperation at any time. Yes sir. Half an hour later, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Quinjet flew into the sky again. Besides Melinda May, the pilot, and her co-pilot, Coulson, the only passenger was Saint. The actual CIA agent, Tina Johansson, was asked to stay back at the military base. 2 hours later, after around 70% of the route drawn by Saint was crossed, he suddenly came out of the cockpit, slowed down, and then opened up the rear hatch. Did you find them? Coulson immediately stood up from his seat, forgetting all about his co-pilot duties, looking more excited than he ever was. Saint nodded, pointing to the southeast, a bit over 30 kilometers in that direction, a lot of key is gathered suspiciously. I will have to fly in to confirm it's them. Do you have to go by yourself? It's nighttime in the States, but here, it's still daytime. I'm much smaller than the Quinjet, and should be harder to spot. The Quinjet is actually invisible, and not only to radars, it could also activate optical invisibility if necessary. Why didn't you say that earlier? Saint rolled his eyes. He had thought that S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't possess such technology yet. After all, the helicarrier wasn't yet made. May, let's vanish. Hearing Coulson, Saint remembered the same sentence said in the same tone by Fury on the helicarrier. If those two weren't good pals, he didn't know who would be. A few minutes later, the Quinjet was finally invisible. When on the move, it looked like a moving distortion affecting the air. When it stopped, it was fully unperceivable to the naked eye. Through the glass in the cockpit, Coulson spotted a large amount of unidentified objects hidden with camouflage nets on the edge of a mountainous area. Just like Saint said, this area, which was supposed to be deserted, seemed to have some large-scale action going in it. When he spotted a mass of gathering men, his eyes shined and he turned around to Melinda May saying, "Can't we get any lower? If we go any lower, the dust agitated by the turbojet engines might raise suspicions. No need. Saint answered Coulson as well, I have confirmed, Tony Stark is in a cave below. Are you sure? Coulson raised his eyebrows and asked with suspicion, on what basis? The movie scenes fit this well, Saint thought, and he then said, you don't have to worry about that, my key sense can't be wrong. Tell the military to come this way. When it gets dark, I'll sneak in to make sure that Tony Stark is protected, you launch your attack at my signal. You are going to help us save him. Coulson was overjoyed, immediately becoming much more confident in the mission's success, but then, he remembered Saint's nature, and asked him suspiciously, free help? How could that ever be? Chapter 75. Speculate and infiltrate. How could it be free? Saint looked at Coulson, as if saying you don't say, and then added, I'll be spending my time and effort, of course I should get paid. However, this will not be for you to deal with, I'm saving Tony Stark, and he could pay far more than you ever could afford. Coulson's eyes were screaming, I knew it, before he turned around saying to Melinda, May, find a suitable place for us to land, and I will contact the military. 10 minutes later, the Quinjet, still invisible, landed in a terrain surrounded by small mountains tens of kilometers away. Later, Coulson entered the passenger and cargo compartment of the aircraft, where a hammock was set up between the walls. Before lying down to prepare for a break, he asked Saint empathetically, we will have to wait for at least 6 hours. Do you need a break? All right. Hearing Saint's answer, Coulson thought of giving him the hammock and arranging another spot for himself to sleep, as Saint was the one about to do all the heavy work. But just as he thought of that, he saw Saint floating in midair, and then laying back in a supine position as if an invisible bed was behind him. Coulson stepped forwards and asked curiously, if you fall asleep, wouldn't you fall? If you fall asleep, would you stop breathing? After responding with his own question, Saint added a warning, oh yeah, after I fall asleep, don't get over 2 meters close to me. You don't want to deal with my sleeping reflexes. 6 hours later, Coulson, in a half-squatting stance, and hiding behind a large cargo box, cautiously shouted, Saint? Saint? Saint yawned, and his feet fell to the ground, and then he said to Coulson, you don't have to be so nervous, I don't really hit people when asleep. The military has arrived within 10 kilometers of the target location. We should go meet them and discuss the battle plan. Why should I care about that? Saint forced himself into full awakening, and then said, I am going to protect Tony Stark, you attack like you want. It's not as simple as you're saying. Coulson came out from behind the cargo box, we are talking about the Tony Stark here. If something happens to him during our raid, no one would be able to afford taking responsibility for such a thing. Every step we would take will have to be well planned, and then re-examined. Only then can we reduce the risks involved enough to start the operation. That is your problem. Saint kept looking away, and turned around without hesitation and headed out of the cabin, I'm going to go into the cave first, and I'll contact you when I find Stark. Hold on. Coulson chased Saint, taking out a black cuboid from his pocket, a high-frequency communication device. He reached out and handed it to Saint, how were you planning to contact us? Even if those terrorists aren't using a signal blocked, you won't be having cell phone reception in that cave. Saint questioned and cursed his own IQ once again, looking at Coulson expressionlessly. He then reached out and picked up the device asking, how do I use this? Coulson tried to explain that to Saint, before giving up and saying, forget it. Tony Stark is a top-tier engineer, he will definitely know how to use it. Now, I'll be going to the military. Saint tiptoed and flew out of the Reach cabin, disappearing into the dark night sky. This wasn't New York, where things farther than 10 meters away were out of sight. Following his key sense, he quickly reached the area above the cave. After finding the entrance, he looked at a security camera above the entrance and said to himself, after entering the cave, there shouldn't be more cameras other than the ones in Stark's cell, no? After all, this is the only entrance or exit to the cave, they shouldn't need more cameras. For Saint, avoiding people spotting him was easy, as he could sense their key with ease. However, he could not detect cameras before they would detect him, as they were obviously inanimate keyless objects. It doesn't matter, let's go. Saint extended his arm, with his palm open, and he made a catch and squeeze motion with his hand, using Janken, paw to crush the camera at the cave's entrance. Then, he immediately flew into the cave, flying silently, and keeping its deepest part under his focus with key sense. Earlier in the day, he scanned the area, and if he didn't guess wrong, the two separated different key in the deepest part of the cave were those of Stark and Yinsen. Eventually, he reached a rusty iron gate, with a camera on top of it. With that, his speculation was confirmed, Tony Stark was behind that iron gate. After crushing that camera as well, pulled the latch off. Tony Stark, who was hammering another piece of Mark I, was surprised by the scene of the gate imprisoning being opened from the outside, just for blonde barefooted young man to come flying in. Oh! My God! Like any normal human being, Dr. Yinsen's eyes opened wide, just like his mouth as he looked in awe at the flying being before his eyes. As for Tony Stark, there weren't many people in the world who were further than him from normal human beings. The first thing he uttered was, "Wow! How much hair gel is on that head? That's an actual crime, you know. You're basically violating the law of gravity there." Saint remained silent for a while, and then asked in a very positive tone, "Tony Stark?" The question was just for formality's sake, otherwise, that face with which he was familiar in both lives, and that light bulb on future Iron Man's chest were more than obvious clues. "That is me." Tony dropped his hammer and stretched his mouth, revealing his signature charming smile. "Hair gel kid, who are you?" Saint had to admit that although Tony was much older than him, he still had a very handsome, charming, and punchable face. "Don't go around giving people nicknames, Mr. Lightbulb." Saint couldn't take it anymore, and waved his hand, slapping Tony of the back of the head. In fact, compared to Point Break for Thor, Capsicle for Captain America, Enormous Green Rage Monster for the Hulk, and Undayrus for Spider-Man, Hair Gel Kid was actually decent, and Saint didn't have much to complain about. Chapter 76. Hair Gel Boy and Mr. Lightbulb. At the same time, Coulson and Melinda were walking into a tent that had just been set up in the desert. This dark green tent was surrounded by a heavy tank, 2 armored vehicles, 3 large armored personnel carriers, 5 military-type jeeps, and a radar communication vehicle. Above them, 3 more armed helicopters could be heard without being seen in the dark. In this tent, which served as a temporary command center, the highest rank was a white gray-haired brigadier general. But strangely enough, the many lieutenants, officers, and even the brigadier general himself were all being mainly commanded at by a black man who was actually a colonel. Being the first to meet Coulson, this colonel extended his right hand and introduced himself, James Rhodes, Air Force Colonel. If Saint was present, he would definitely recognize this good friend of Iron Man, the future war machine, Colonel James Rupert Rhodes. Coulson shook Rhodes's hand saying, "Phil Coulson, CIA." Then, Colonel Rhodes shook hands with Melinda, before the 3 of them and the rest of the military in the room formed a circle and began to develop a plan of operations. Not long after their discussion, a discordant voice came out, "Wait." The middle-aged old-fashioned brigadier general, who had been silent all along, suddenly made his presence known and pointed to Coulson saying, "All your tactics revolve around your foreign aid, because you have this Superboy of yours? Won't that be fun, relying on him because he found Tony Stark? For all we know, he just found out where he was because he is some damn mutant. What did he do to prove himself? How can we rely on him to protect Stark?" After his long speech, the grey-haired general turned around whispering with anger, "Why are we putting all our hopes in some 19-year-old kid?" The many lieutenants and officers around seemed to agree, frowning and nodding slightly. Obviously, the general's words were something they agreed with, as by habit, they only trusted their brothers in arms, not some random mysterious shady characters that suddenly popped out of nowhere. "General, I understand your concern." Coulson looked up to the general, his face unchanged, and he did not hesitate to endorse Saint, "But unlike us, you do not comprehend the power of Golden Boy. I can put my life on the line as guarantee that he could find and protect Tony Stark without disturbing the enemy. We just need to wait to hear from him." "You're kidding." General Baker looked at Coulson with disdain and retorted, "Your word means nothing to me." "Your life, you say? What's your life worth compared to that of Tony Stark?" Coulson frowned slightly, and he answered coldly, "Well, our arguing about this right now is meaningless. Golden Boy does not work for us, nor is he bound by anyone. Right now, he is already in the cave where Tony Stark is." "What?" Colonel Rhodes had remained neutral until now. But now, he sided with the general and screamed, "Do you know what you're doing, Agent Coulson? If something happens to Tony, you be damn sure that I'm taking your ass to martial court. With the two highest-ranked officers both on the same side, the inferior lieutenants and officers all immediately gave Coulson their gazes of condemnation, and began to question him as well. Their noise was getting louder, when suddenly the sound of interference noise coming out of Coulson's pocket could be heard, followed by a muffled, "Hello? Is anyone there?" A voice that's familiar to many ears could be heard, sealing the mouths of everyone questioning Coulson. Tony. Rhodes recognized the voice instantly. Pushing the Brigadier General to the side, he rushed to Coulson shouting, "Tony! Is that you?" Shouting louder is useless. Coulson pulled the high-frequency communication device out of his pocket, shaking it in his hand. Looking at Rhodes, he explained, "If I don't press the call button, he won't hear you." At this moment, from the device, another voice could be heard, "Why is no one responding? You didn't mess up the device, did you, Mr. Lightbulb?" The mocking voice of Tony Stark followed once again, "Hair gel kid, shut up. I have 7 PhDs, how many do you have? Oh, excuse me, did you even graduate from junior high?" In this dead silence, Coulson remained stunned for a while, before popped up a plate hiding a row of buttons on his device. Holding one of them, he said, "Mr. Stark." Tony then immediately yelled, "Hello! Who is this?" Tony. Now knowing how to use the device, Colonel Rhodes snatched it from Coulson's hand saying, "You son of a bitch! Good to hear your voice again. Rhodey." Tony suddenly stopped yelling, sounding much more serious, "You've been looking for me. Those were my orders." Despite his sarcastic tone, Rhodes's eyes were slightly watery. "Otherwise, do you really think I would come to the middle of nowhere?" No, believing this excuse, Tony did not joke around, saying in a cold voice, "Rhodey, keep this for later. For now, let's go home." "All right. I'm coming to pick you up right now. I'll contact you when I arrive." After Colonel Rhodes temporarily ended the call, he slammed the table and began to issue a series of tactical orders. No one argued, in fact, everyone in the tent understood, they were in a race against time. Well, that's just what they thought, reality was rather different. On the other side of the call, Tony Stark pulled out an old grenade from a concealed corner in the cave. He was trying to set it up under the cold iron gate, when Saint approached him. "Hey! Hello, what do you want with that?" "Gain time." Tony, who had already been let down once by the military, was certain that the military raid would not be reliable, at least not as reliable as Saint, who managed to sneak in. Therefore, he kept trying to set up his trap, as he answered Saint, "Once Rhodey attacks from the outside, the 10 Commandments men will come to me immediately." Chapter 77. Bloodthirsty Maniac? Hearing Tony's reasoning, Saint couldn't help but chuckle, pointing at the camera that he had destroyed and saying, "So this is what they count as genius these days? As soon as I walked through that door, the 10 Commandments have realized that something is off. Within about half a minute, some of them will come through that corridor." Tony shrugged in disagreement, "You're just talking about a possibility. And if what you're saying is true, that's more of a reason for us to try to delay them." "No. Wrong, it's not just a possibility, and wrong, we don't need to delay them." As Saint shook his head, he reached out, pushing the rusty iron gate open, and throwing the grenade outside while clenching his fist. "If the 10 Commandments want to come to their death, let them come. This kid might actually be more insane than me." Tony narrowed his eyes, not sure if Saint was a suicidal madman or a man confident in his capabilities like himself. Grenade. Just then, from outside, he heard a sudden scream, just like Saint predicted. Not only did the 10 Commandments terrorists arrive in time, but the grenade was thrown right in front of them. Coincidence? Tony frowned, as his precise sense of timing allowed him to notice clearly that the approaching men did come in no more than 30 seconds. "What's this crappy grenade you have?" Saint turned around to Tony, asking in surprise, "We both heard it hitting the ground hard, why is it not exploding?" Tony put his palm on his forehead, completely losing whatever confidence he had in Saint. "You really did not graduate from junior high school, did you? Who told you that a grenade can be detonated through collision? You could shoot the thing with a bullet and it will not explode." Well, that's fine." Saint looked away shamelessly and floated into the air, approaching the gate. "I don't like bombs anyway. It's fine if it doesn't explode." He is. This kid is really more insane than I am. Tony watched in awe as Saint swayed to the terrorists, as if what they were holding were useless firecrackers, not deadly weaponry. The next second, with his head poking out of the gate, Tony Stark's eyes caught an amazing sight. As the first terrorist holding his machine gun approached, Saint waved his hand as if swatting a fly, and the man was blown away as if his by an invisible big hand. The man's whole body flew, his feet leaving the ground, knocking over 3 other terrorists that followed into a pile. Unconsciously, Tony reached for his forehead thinking. He had been hit by Saint before on the back of the head. However, his force would not have been nearly enough for this, it was far less than 1% of what he was showing now. The shocked expression on his face had not subsided yet, when he saw Saint's right arm being raised, and his fingers spreading as if he was holding a basketball, before he gathered his fingers slowly, clenching his fist. As Saint moved his hands, the pile of terrorists was gathered, and slowly raised into the air. Then, under their mad collective screams, they were getting tighter together, as if getting squeezed as Saint's fingers were being folded inwards. Just like that, what used to be 4 buff soldiers was squeezed into a pulp of undistinguishable flesh, blood and bones. I just killed them. This thought popped up in Saint's mind in hindsight, scaring him slightly and taking him by surprise. Until this moment in time, he had never taken the life of another human, in neither of his lifetimes. Still, instead of feeling discomfort as he did what he did, he felt so excited that he wanted to shout out. These damn Saiyan genes! Saint clenched his teeth, trying to forcibly suppress the sensation of blood boiling in his veins. Just as he was doing that, he could hear an annoying sound of screams and machine guns. He looked up, only to see 2 remaining terrorists that were behind their companions shooting him madly. He frowned, and a bright golden flame shrouded his entire body. One by one, the rifle bullets hit the golden flame, making ripples in it before turning into steel debris and falling off of Saint's body. What he had just done was a much more advanced version of Jan-Ken, Gu, Rock. The bullets were being pushed into the golden flame's massive energy by their own momentum, inevitably being destroyed on the spot. Seeing that the 2 terrorists who had been dumbfounded and frightened to death were still pulling their triggers, and that the bullets were being completely eradicated by his golden flames, Saint landed and began to advance step by step. He walked slowly, leaving a trail of metal debris as he approached them. He came to the front of the 2 terrorists, in an awe-inducing majestic manner. His left and right hands pinched their necks, and he raised them up, as if lifting 2 chicks. The endless stream of gunshots came to abrupt end, and the 2 terrorists who actually felt death gripping them by the neck both instinctively squirmed and kicked, trying to get free from Saint's iron pliers of fingers. Still, with the golden flame surrounding his body, they could not even touch his skin. Then, Saint slightly rotated both of his wrists, and with a couple of cracks, he took away a couple more lives with ease. Watching this, not only the enemy was frightened by the situation, Tony and Dr. Yinsen also shivered as they watched Saint throwing away the 2 corpses as if they were trash, and then turning around to them. Both stepped backwards instinctively. This had nothing to do with trust, both were intelligent enough to have the sufficing instinctive reaction to avoid harm. Saint did not think much of it. After scanning the area with key sense, he said, "You 2 get back inside, more are coming. I don't want to be distracted by having to protect the 2 of you." Chapter 78. Tony Stark. Humble. This kid is really a madman. He's taking human lives as if he's pinching a few bugs, and doesn't even seem to be slightly emotional about it. Tony Stark could only label Saint as an extreme danger, but he then suddenly remembered that as he tried to provoke him before, the young man didn't seem to get angry, and just was an obnoxious little brat. Perhaps only fighting turned him into this maniac? Thinking about this, the label of extremely dangerous turned into relatively dangerous, and Tony felt a lot more at ease. No one would like being beside a bloodthirsty maniac, but in this situation, some mania that's tied to fighting was acceptable, and perhaps even wanted. At this moment, Rhodes's anxious voice suddenly echoed again in the cave, awakening Tony from his thoughts. "Tony! How are you doing there? We are about to collide with the enemy. You must hold on." Tony grabbed the communication device, looked strangely at Saint, and then said in an awkward tone, "Hey! Rhodey, I'm safe now. You don't have to worry. Don't rush in too much, and take your time as you come." "Tony, stop with the arrogance, you bastard. Now is not the time." Tony once again looked at Saint, and then, in a rare moment of seriousness, he said to Rhodes, "Rhodey, in all my life, I have never been so humble. Damn. Your acting has improved. Tony Stark and, humility? Stop bluffing, Tony, you sounded so sincere I almost believe you. 15 minutes later, the team of Colonel Rhodes, Phil Coulson, Melinda May and few armed soldiers reached the deepest part of the cave, to witness the most incredible scene that they had ever seen. At the entrance of the chamber, a small mountain of ravaged corpses was piled up, surrounded by a pool of blood that leaked into a small river extending outside. The cold dead bodies were innumerable, and the dismembered limbs lying around were countless. Having already thrown up several times, Dr. Yinsen, with his face pale, could hardly remain standing. As for Tony, who could resist the urge to vomit with difficulty, there was no trace of his usual cynicism left on his face, and he looked just gloomy. As for Saint, he was extremely calm, and his body was clean, not a drop of blood reaching it. However, despite his deceiving appearance, no one dared to question that the sea of blood before them was entirely his masterpiece. In this dead cold atmosphere, no one could utter a word. Even the one most familiar with Saint, Coulson, was extremely overwhelmed by what he was witnessing. Previously, in his several conflicts with S.H.I.E.L.D., Saint never hit so heavy-handedly. Even against the criminals like those of the Hand and the Axe Gang, he still had mercy, not taking a single life. Therefore, Coulson did not expect at all that this person that he had personally assessed as obnoxious, but kind-hearted, would make such a massacre. After all, among the corpses before Coulson, over half of them were squished and destroyed beyond recognition. Even to Coulson with all his experience, this was simply unthinkable. All these people, previously of different skin tones, were now all of one color, crimson red. Just masses of flesh, bones and blood. Vomit. After finally seeing Rhodes, Tony Stark could not keep calm anymore. Seeing the almost dry vomit of Tony, Saint understood why he wanted a cheeseburger as soon as he returned home. As Rhodes helped Tony, he had finally understood what Tony meant in their last call when asked about the situation, indescribable. This was the kind of scene that one would only read about in the description of the punishments held after war by ancient tyrant. But now as Rhodes saw it with his own eyes, he understood how shocking it was. "Let's go out, Tony." Colonel Rhodes helped Tony Stark, and while they were walking outside, he asked in his earphones, "Is the armored vehicle ready?" Then, the group rushed out, surrounding Tony Stark, no one wanting to see more of what was back in the cave, and no one remembering Tony's blueprints of Mark I that were still lying quietly in the corner. 8 hours later, in the U.S. Air Force Base in Afghanistan. In front of a white jet, in a grey and black striped suit, Tony had recovered a substantial amount of his old charm, saying in a disappointed look, "What? You're not going to come with me in my private jet? Why? Can you fly back on your own, golden boy?" "Well, that would not impossible." Saint shrugged, and then gulped, thinking, "I'd have to fly for a few days, as I would probably get lost for a while." Keeping this sentence to himself, he added, "However, I have a special aircraft awaiting me to take me back home." That of the 2 CIA agents. Tony's invitation was rarely rejected throughout his lifetime, and he was rather persistent. "A military aircraft will never be this luxurious, hair gel kid. Believe me, you would regret missing out on this." "Well, indeed, when it comes to comfort and luxury, nothing could compete with what you have, light bulb man. But this jet is far more advanced than yours, taking off and landing vertically, and going far faster than what your plane could ever achieve." Saint shrugged. "Nonsense." Not hiding his narcissism, Tony said, "Stop bragging, kid. If there's such a jet in the world, it would be me making it. Who else would?" "You dad." Saint smirked at Tony and explained, "I'm not bragging, it's not my own plane. This Quinjet of theirs, its core technology was provided by Howard Stark." Chapter 79. You are sick, you need help. Old man. Tony Stark wasn't ignorant of his own father's research, but his own arrogant character didn't allow him to pick after anyone, especially his father who he loves and hates. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken him until now to create the arc reactor, which is something that Howard Stark researched, and when he thought of the words hover car, he immediately reacted, the Stark Expo in 1943? The Quajet in that old car. I'm going to have a look. Tony Stark didn't get into his own private jet, and instead walked directly toward the agents and pointed out, "I don't remember my old man authorizing the CIA to use his research." At this time, Saint suddenly realized that said too much. He felt like he spoiled the plot to a movie enthusiast. However, since things had come to this point, Saint had no choice but to follow Tony Stark toward the location of the Quinjet. After a while, Colonel James Rhodes, dressed in a solemn military uniform with the Medal of Honor on his chest, walked out of the cabin door of the private jet. "Tony? Tony? Is there anyone? Hey!" At this time, besides the private jet, only Colonel Rhodes was left on the air stair, standing alone in the wind since Saint and Tony Stark had long since disappeared. "You son of a... You made me wait for you for 5 hours, and now you just leave without telling me. Not again." On the other hand, under the unkind gazes of Coulson and Melinda May, Saint led Tony Stark into the open rear cabin of the Quinjet. Cough cough. With a dry cough, Saint spread his hands and said, "I accidentally told him that the core technology of this plane was actually provided by his father." Hearing these words, Coulson's eyes that were cold changed, as he felt like beating Saint up. If they didn't think that they couldn't beat Saint, they would have already started. At the same time, Tony Stark, who held a high-tech personal communication terminal in his hand, successfully hacked the main system of the Quinjet. In simple words, he used a high-end mobile phone and successfully took over the Quinjet. It really is the old man's Quajet engine. Tony Stark raised his arm and raised the communication terminal in his hand. "Give me an explanation. Immediately. Right now. Otherwise, UCIA will wait to receive Stark Industries' legal letter." Saint directly explained to Tony Stark, "There is indeed injustice in this case, but a debt has its debtor. Don't make a mistake, they are not from the CIA. I have no right to explain anything else to you." Coulson first shook his head, and then comforted Tony Stark, "Mr. Stark, please wait a moment, I want to ask my superiors." After walking away for a while, Coulson, who gave a call to Nick Fury, turned around and walked back. "Mr. Stark, we're not actually Actually, they are not the CIA. They are the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, the Global Intelligence Agency of S.H.I.E.L.D. for short. Your father Howard Stark is one of their founders, so they didn't actually steal his research." As Saint interrupted Coulson's words, dozens of words popped out of his mouth in one breath, and then he let out a long breath with a very comfortable expression. He muttered to himself very loudly, "Damn! I finally said it, I almost felt suffocated." Tony Stark was speechless for a long time, then suddenly stepped forward, patted Saint on the shoulder, and said earnestly, "Hair Gel Kid, you are sick, you need help. Take a step into that direction first, let's cure your crazy narcissism, to begin with, Lightbulb Man. I warn you, call me Lightbulb Man again, and I'll be mad." "Lightbulb Man? Why aren't you mad? You wait for me." 3 days later. At the top of the Imperial City. "Is this Chinese, Jarvis? Translate, the highest point in the Imperial City? Hair Gel Kid, what does this mean?" This is the ancient legend of 2 peerless masters in the Chinese martial arts world who fought on the top of the Imperial City for 3 days. Peerless Master? Peerless Master. I like this term. Hair Gel Kid, your eyes can still see my awesomeness, so I will forgive you. When I said a peerless master, I meant me. And me as well, after all, it's me who is fighting you. Well, this is actually unintentional. Why do you speak Chinese? Because I am Chinese, die. Saying that, Saint released the Saiyan full power, 20%, returned to his original appearance with black hair and black eyes, and stretched out his right hand to Tony Stark. "Let me reintroduce myself, I'm Saint Lee." Tony Stark was stunned for a moment and then found that he was not very surprised. After experiencing the series of events that happened in the cave, he felt that even if Saint became a dragon in front of him, he would totally accept it. Tony Stark. Tony Stark reported his full name as a sign of seriousness, reached out, and shook Saint's hand. "Your identity is top secret, right? Why are you willing to tell me?" "Because I won't be able to hide it soon." Saint spread his hands, and then pointed to Coulson. "It took you about 3 seconds to hack their Quinjet? With this as a sign, after a little while, you will be able to access all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s data, right?" "A little while longer?" Tony Stark asked and raised his eyebrows. "I got it done 3 minutes ago. Actually, I didn't find any information about the Golden Boy." Because Saint showed a distressed expression, turned his head to look at Coulson and said, "Did you not store my information on an online server?" Coulson, who had long been unable to keep up with the rhythm of the conversation between the two, replied subconsciously, secrets above level 8 have a special storage method. You are level 10. Having said that, Coulson suddenly reacted before Saint could say anything and said, Mr. Stark, please stop your illegal intrusion on our data center immediately. Chapter 80. The Artificial Intelligence. Jarvis. Hearing this, Tony Stark glanced at Coulson and said blatantly to the personal terminal in his hand, Jarvis, make a copy of all the data and save it in my private data center. Coulson was stunned again, and then immediately shouted at the personal terminal in Tony Stark's hand, Mr. Jarvis, you are illegally acquiring state secrets, stop any of your actions immediately, otherwise, more than 10 years of prison is waiting for you. Saint couldn't bear to look directly at Coulson and covered his face. He secretly thought, Coulson, Coulson, Coulson. If you can put an artificial intelligence in prison, I will not only write your name upside down, I will even be at your service in the future. Tony Stark's face was even more interesting. He glanced at Coulson in front of him with sympathy as if he was looking at a mental retardation patient, and his tone was also full of sympathy. Jarvis is my smart housekeeper, can you understand this? He is just a line of data that can think independently. Coulson knew that he made a joke of himself and felt embarrassed, but he still performed his duties unswervingly. Mr. Stark, what I said just now has the same effect on you. My team of lawyers is waiting for you. Tony Stark waved his hand indifferently. Since the old man is your founder, then if I want to see what he left behind, no one can stop me. Coulson pondered for a while, then turned to look at Melinda May, pointed at Tony Stark, and said, May, get ready to take off, let's take him and go to the Triskelion. Melinda May nodded, then suddenly moved in front of Tony Stark, and in just a blink of an eye, she had already twisted his arm to subdue him, and said in a commanding tone, return the Quinjet's control. Tony Stark didn't do any needless struggle, but turned his head subconsciously and looked at the person with the highest power value present, only to see Saint making a posture of a great philosopher looking at the sky. 10 minutes later, the Quinjet was already in the air, cruising at an altitude of 10,000 meters. Tony Stark, who became a prisoner of S.H.I.E.L.D., had no choice but to sit in a very uncomfortable position. On the foldable passenger seat against the cabin wall, with the seat belt tying him tightly, he could do nothing about it. Tony Stark twisted his body unhappily, looked at Saint who was lying on a large cargo box in a very careless way, and complained, Hair gel kid, why don't you help me, you're breaking my heart. Come on, you're Tony Stark, they won't dare do anything to you, right? Saint ignored the fact that everything was his fault, he replied as a matter of course, besides, what does this has to do with me? You can settle it by yourself, big boy. Tony Stark felt that what Saint said made sense, but he was still speechless, and even felt that something strange about Saint, this kid is very fond of me. At this time, Phil Coulson, the co-pilot of the Quinjet, left the cockpit and walked into the cargo compartment where the two of them were. Why are you lying on the cargo box? Hearing Coulson's question, Tony Stark, who was sitting very uncomfortably, was about to open his mouth to express his agreement, but only to hear Coulson continue, can't you just hover in the air and sleep? Hearing this, Tony Stark instantly forgot his original plan, and before Saint spoke, he looked at Coulson like he is stupid and said, oh my god. How did you ask such an idiot question? We are now on this plane. It is rushing forward at a speed close to Mach 2. If he floats now, he will immediately lose his original inertia and no longer synchronize with the plane under our feet, and once he breaks the existing balance, he would smash into the tail of the plane and become a meat paste. That's partially true. Saint confirmed Tony's words, but denied his conclusion, if I float here, I would indeed hit the tail of the plane, but, according to my estimation, I will just create an additional hole in the Quinjet without being damaged myself, would you like me to try? Nearly 9 hours later, the Quinjet, which had been away for nearly 2 days, returned to the United States and landed in the Triskelion, the headquarters of the S.H.I.E.L.D. The moment the Quinjet landed, Saint, who had fallen asleep on the cargo box, suddenly woke up, and jumped up in a fighting stance, ready for action. Hey, hey, hey! Tony Stark, who was sitting not far from the cargo box, screamed nervously before he said, don't be crazy, hair gel kid, we just landed. Saint blinked a few times and directly activated Saiyan full power, 20%. The pain caused by the transformation made him wake up in an instant, and he inhaled a breath of air to calm down. Saint turned his head and looked at Coulson, who came out of the cockpit, angrily and said, "Why did you bring me here too? Take me back first. You were asleep, okay? It would be dangerous to wake you up, okay? You could have crushed the Quinjet if I woke you up suddenly." Coulson thought with grief in his heart before he said, "This is a fighter jet. We cannot fly into the city unless there is a military emergency." Saint rolled his eyes, obviously not believing this excuse very much, but he didn't confront him about it. "Forget it, I'll fly back by myself, see you another day, Coulson, bye-bye, Lightbulb Man." "Wait." Tony Stark just uttered the W sound from the word wait and Saint was already out of there, drawing a graceful arc in the air. After passing through the open rear hatch of the Quinjet, he disappeared into the sky. What Tony Stark will never admit is that when Saint was here, he was never worried about his safety, but after Saint left. "Mr. Stark." Coulson unfastened the seat belt that bound Tony Stark and made a pleased gesture. "Let's go, our chief wants to see you, don't worry, he's an old acquaintance of your father."